Right, ready to go.
Well, good morning, folks, and welcome to the October 24th meeting of the Technical Advisory Group to the Vermont Public Utility Commission on the matter of the Clean Heat Standard. We've done a quick count. We have a quorum, so this meeting is official, I guess is the word. The usual housekeeping request that TAG members keep their video on while we conduct the meeting, and that others keep their video off, and that all of us keep our audio off until we're speaking. So we solve the feedback problem. And the other point, of course, is that we don't use the chat for anything but links to relevant documents. And with that, I'll go to review and approval of the minutes of the last week's meeting, but I'm guessing that folks have not reviewed them, in part maybe because there wasn't a hyperlink in the agenda. I only had a chance to look at them earlier this morning. If that assessment is correct, we will put the review and approval of the minutes of last week's meeting and today's meeting on next week's agenda. Does that make sense, or has everyone read them? Okay. I'll take silence as confirmation of my impression. Okay. We've got several things on the agenda today. We want to review Opinion Dynamics responses to our questions, and we're going to spend some time on that. We allocated nearly an hour. Then we'll chat about the PUC's draft rule and the companion memo. The main question there will be whether TAG members feel that there's anything in the draft rule that we are tasked to respond to. And then we'll have a discussion about public health considerations, which of course is one of our tasks. We may flip when we review that, when we discuss that with the draft rule, just so we can accommodate the schedule of
Nora
from NESCOM. Yeah, Emily Levin can't be with us today. So is there anything else that anyone would want to add to the agenda? Okay, if not, let's go. Let's dig into the responses from Opinion Dynamics. Catherine, does it make sense to put them up on the screen?
I can do that. Hold on
And
just a second.
And our plan here is to go through them one by one and get TAG reactions and make decisions about whether we want to respond, and if we do, how we want to respond. I know that some of you have given some thought to these responses, and we'll want to hear them. And I'm going to actually turn to Ken, in fact, to help us work through the memo. So with that, is that that's page one, installed measures? We start with installed measures?
Yep.
Okay.
And can I ask a process question?
Make a suggestion even.
Well, no, it's truly in the form of a question, and that is there a date at which a technical reference manual is going to be finalized? And a kind of a sub question is, what is the role of is the rulemaking? Does it refer very specifically to the technical reference manual? Where this is going is the technical reference manual or resource manual, whatever it's called, TRM, is it subject to approval by the state legislature?
Well, there's a good question. I didn't expect that final part of it. It is subject to approval by the PUC, right?
Right. So then it's the reference in the rules to this. Therefore, is this a part of what gets approved So, you know, it's a,
But
anyway, that's the question.
I think it's a fair question. I think that, well, this will be interesting. I think that the legislature will, in reviewing the rule, would certainly be reviewing the TRM that the PUC puts forward. And that is not necessarily the final TRM that Opinion Dynamics delivers to the PUC. Right? They're just a contractor. So when their contract is up, they'll have delivered a final draft of the TRM. What the PUC forward, you know, as part of the rule or as a supplement to the rule will be whatever they think it should be, certainly modulated, I would assume, in part by the work that we're doing, and of course by all the inputs and filings that interested parties and members of the public have given. So yes, when they go to the legislature on January 15th with their check back report, I would assume that the TRM or some version of it would be a part of that package.
Well, that's not the check back report. This is the draft rule that the legislature approves or not approves. I mean, there's the
Right.
check back report granted, but this
But-
is something. Anyway, we'll just explore that as we go on. But that's the question. You know, can the legislature alter the TRM?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. I think the answer would be ultimately yes, but I said check back report, but also the draft rule accompanies the check back report on January 15th.
Okay.
Brian.
Yeah, I think the answer to Ken's question is we don't know.
Yeah.
I think you make some good points, Riddick, but I think we just don't know. The legislature is going to take up the clean heat standard. Well, my understanding is they're going to take up either the clean heat standard, the Affordable Heat Act as it was approved last year, or potentially some modification of it. And you know exactly what gets discussed in what committees and with what supporting information is unknown.
Fair enough.
And we don't know. We can make educated guesses, but I would say that the short answer is we don't know. And if the PUC was on, I'd ask Tom. And if if my lawyer was on, I might ask them, but they're not here.
Well, let me put it a different way then. If the legislature is unhappy with what the clean heat standard looks like at this point, of which the TRM is a component, they could decide not to approve what they've gotten from the PUC, and that would be and change it even, or rewrite the legislation or whatever, and that would be effectively a means of disapproving the TRM. So sure.
Well, the rulemaking would have to go through the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, which would be an opportunity for feedback.
Sorry, Brian, I don't think that's true. This law was written specifically different so that it doesn't go through LCAR. It goes to the full body of the legislature. That's the way I understand it. It does not go to LCAR.
That's correct, Ken, in my reading.
Okay.
But it's
Okay. So
So
effectively
the whole rule package is going to go to the legislature on January 15th. An unusual piece, but
Yes.
that's where this is going.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. My mistake.
No.
So should we jump in?
My view, which is that we don't know.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's fine. There's certainly uncertainties there. And we can come back to this in the section where we talk about the draft rule and the companion memo. The companion memo, I think, is quite revealing in this regard. So we'll see. Okay.
So
Well-
my suggestion was we just go through this point by point. Unfortunately, they didn't number their responses. So we've got bullet point number 1, new construction. And
Well, I'm sorry, before we go on, Ken had a much easier question first, which was, is there a date for finalization of the TRM? And I think that would be good to know.
Right. I'm not sure we know that either.
Isn't it the contract end date, whatever that is? If, I don't know offhand. I thought it was, geez, I think it's this month, end of this month. For some reason, I think it is. I don't know though.
Well, I ask that we send a communication to the PUC about that, because I think it's related to the bigger question, right? What is the role of TRM in the overall rule? But the extent, if there's going to be a final product from Opinion Dynamics by certain point, fine, that just means the PUC has to make all the modifications after the contract is over. So I think that's a reasonable question to say, okay, what's going on here? TRM, is it going to be a final product from OD by a specific date? What is that? And then we'll have the follow-up about how this whole rulemaking thing gets unveiled, and the linkages between the rule text and the TRM and blah, blah, blah. One question at a time, though. I agree with Brian.
We'll have an answer to that by, for our next meeting. We'll talk with Deirdre and the PUC. That's fine. Okay. So Catherine,
Yeah, I was just going to say that seems like the best approach here is just to go through this response by response. I know, Ken, you've had some thoughts about each of these, and we want to just hear from everybody. If you have any additional comments that you want to feed back to OD, or you have additional questions, I guess we still have times for additional questions or clarifications. So let's start with new construction. I'm assuming that everybody's read this, so we're not going to go through the answers per se. So we're not going to read it out. So anybody have any comments regarding their response to new construction? And Ken, I know you do. So
yeah, I was waiting to see if anybody else did. And this is, it's related to kind of my first question. I'm not going to argue for or against their conclusion that you shouldn't have new construction measures. My thing is the sort of follow-up. And it's that if a heat pump, for example, or any installed measure is installed in new construction, whether it be a standalone building or the addition on a building, is that available for clean heat credits? Because if it is, then it doesn't actually reduce carbon emissions. And if it isn't, then the characterization, the data that's necessary to process a credit needs to have that in it, that this is an installation in a new building, therefore is not subject to credit. So that's kind of related to my question, is how does the TRM get rolled into the rule? But this is a very specific example. It's simply saying, okay, we're not going to have an installed measure related to new construction. That's an incomplete answer. We need to have the complete answer, which is, what do we do with new construction? Do we include new installations in new construction as eligible for clean heat measures, or don't we? And maybe this is not a question for Opinion Dynamics to answer. Maybe it's something that gets forwarded to the PUC, again, related to the relationship of the TRM to the rule.
Any other thoughts, questions?
well, I would just, my initial, I think this is clearly an important issue. Ken, as you know, new construction shows up in energy efficiency programs, and the savings are determined against a what would have happened otherwise.
Yeah, I mean,
Event. So the question would be, and it's a but-for test. I mean, would an incentive paid to install a heat pump in new construction cause the heat pump to be installed, whereas otherwise it would have been, a propane boiler? That would be the question. In which case, I mean, if that could be established, then I think arguably new construction, installations could count.
But I don't think we will ever have a mechanism to do that determination. You know, I mean, my opinion on this is that it should be included, you know, because of ease. Any installed measure should be included as a creditable activity, with the recognition, therefore, that when we look at the retirement schedule and the requirement for credits, that there are a number of credits that maybe gets reconciliation, a number of credits that don't actually get us towards the goal. But again, the alternative of not allowing them, I think, is just administratively harder.
Right.
So Emily Grubert, welcome. I
Thank
see you
you.
have a question.
Yeah, with the new construction counterfactual, I guess my main question is whether it's likely that somebody would require that new construction be only clean heat from the very beginning in some cases, because if not, then agree, it probably makes sense to think about including it. But if there's even a significant chance that that would be part of the building code or something, particularly under Vermont's carbon rules, it does seem like adding it here as a creditable activity would be kind of a pressure not to do that, essentially because you'd be taking away a creditable activity by changing the building code. So I wonder a little bit about some of the moral hazard here and how likely it would be that new construction would be required to have clean heat in the future.
I'm guessing it's not going to be a building code requirement anytime soon,
Well, I'm happy
but
to
I
offer-
could be wrong. Matt?
Well, many of you know this, but the state of Vermont is going, or the legislature will review a study determining how to enforce building codes, energy codes for residential. We don't have that in Vermont other than a few of our larger cities. And I suspect the answer is money for state employees to inspect it and permit fees to process it. But it's not being not considered. It's being considered, but it's going through a different type of process than one that we're doing. It's parallel track.
All right, any other comments? I am, by the way, taking notes. The idea would be that we would sort of take the points raised in this discussion and consolidate them into a follow-up memo to Opinion Dynamics. So are we ready to move on to wood stoves replacing? Unfortunately, I have mine. Cannot read it. Replacing fossil fuels. Ryan.
Yes, and I do have something to say here. But if somebody else wants to start, I'm more than glad to sit back.
So Brian has his hand raised. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm waiting for Ken to kick back and have a sip of his coffee.
I don't drink
so-
coffee, folks. You should all be happy that I don't.
When we were reviewing the TRM for installed measures for stoves, it says that the baseline condition for installation of advanced wood heat was replacement of a less efficient wood stove. And the way they're reconciling this, and I need to understand this better, is that even though the baseline condition in the installed measures TRM is replacement of a wood stove with advanced wood heat with basically a more efficient wood appliance with a more efficient wood burning appliance, in the fuels TRM, it's the replacement of fossil fuels with wood heat, with wood fuels, pellets or chips or cordwood. And just like on the face of that, that's a little confusing, but I have not had a chance to dig into the actual determination of the credits in the installed measures part. I understand it at the level of the of the act, where it's the the credits are equal to the life cycle emissions of the fuel use that's avoided minus the life cycle emissions of the fuel that's used instead. And I, have to believe that the installed measures characterization is using the emission factors for fuel that's avoided minus fuel that's instead, but it's just it's more than a little confusing to have the fuels baseline be the fossil fuels, but having the installed measure baseline be another wood stove. So I understand what the response is here, that it's duplicative of the wood fuel measure characterization, but I'm not quite understanding that if that's the case, why they wouldn't be, congruent with each other.
Well, I have a different problem, Brian. It might make your problem go away. And that is that they say that the credits are going to be based on the fuel sold. That's the way I translate duplicative of the wood fuel measure characterization, which is if you buy X million BTU of wood, you get X credits. That is a real problem because, as we know, about 20% of the thermal load in Vermont is currently addressed through the use of wood heat. This in no way suggests or opens does not describe the situation where wood is replacing fossil fuel. 20% of current heat is supplied by wood. If you're going to be giving credits to people buying wood, then you've opened up this brand new, very large credit number that does absolutely nothing to reduce fossil fuel use. I never believed that we should be providing credit. I never believed at the outset that we should be providing credits for the sale of wood as a biofuel. Different than the liquid biofuels because we essentially have very little of that. But wood as a biofuel is not a creditable action. It is the appliance. It is, and then it gets to your question about, okay, is the appliance replacing fossil fuel? Or is it replacing another wood stove? And they kind of have that in the description where they use a blend. And I haven't gone through the details to determine if that blend is appropriate, but it's for all the measures. So, us probably need to make sure that blend is what we really intend. But in this case, to say, oh, we're just going to give credits for people to buy wood, that's a huge problem, massive problem in it. This one needs to have a very strong message. No, that we are going to have our separate discussion about which wood appliances do we want to have creditable. But this answer of no, it's just going to be the purchase of wood, that cannot, being a little strong, but anyway, that's not going to work.
Right, and I have too many windows open, but from memory, I don't think delivery of wood fuel is a clean heat measure. I think advanced wood heat is a clean heat measure. And so installation of, advanced wood heat, however we define it, the credits that you earn are going to be based upon the assumed fuel that you're not using minus the emissions for the fuel you're not using minus the fuel that you're using instead. And then that's coming from this emissions factor. But I don't think that delivery of wood fuel was ever, it's not a clean heat measure. It wasn't a clean heat measure in the act. And then we're going to have this discussion about, well, what is advanced wood heat? And then how are we going to credit it?
But I just don't understand their sentence, how they're not going to have an installed measure for a wood appliance, okay? Because they say it's duplicative of wood fuel measure characterization. That suggests that the credit comes from the volume of wood, not from the installation of the measure. And that is at least confusing.
Yeah, I think
but I don't know I don't know what they intend there. If I buy a wood stove, if we agree that buying a wood stove, pellet stove, wood stove, even an advanced wood heat system is a creditable activity, they're saying, well, we're not going to call it an installed measure. we're going to say it somehow falls under the wood fuel measure characterization. That assumes that the credit is determined on the amount of fuel sold, not on the installation of the measure.
Well, we could go on, but I'm going to stop myself before Catherine stops me for me, because I don't think we're going to resolve this here. I think this is something that needs to go back to
Right.
opinion dynamics.
For purposes of a response to OD, we can just raise this point and say, this is unclear to us, this is, it doesn't make sense, and get the point across. Yeah.
Well, I think it's unclear and confusing, and here's why. And I think that's easy to, if you haven't captured it, Catherine, I think, but I'm certainly happy to write you something that describes that. And I know Ken, I don't want to volunteer you, Ken, but it sounds like you've got something to say. So that would be easy. And I don't think we're not going to resolve it today. We just need more information. And then I guess we need to decide whether or not, in the time that we have OD on contract, whether or not we want them to change this characterization and or clarify the characterization of advanced wood heat, wood appliances and as an installed measure, and how that's characterized in the TRM, and wood fuels and how they're characterized in the delivered measure TRM.
Certainly gladly accept text for the response. Absolutely.
Well, and what I was thinking is we can, you can send us something and we'll include it, Brian, and then we'll certainly have the TAG review the whole document before it goes back, if in case there's something got missed. Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I was hoping to clarify something because it's not clear in my head after listening to this conversation, and also to not create a make work for opinion dynamics. Is it our understanding that wood burning, biomass burning appliances, as long as they meet certain standards, would qualify for credits, but the fuel in them wouldn't, versus on the biofuel side, whether it's biogas or liquid biofuel, the fuel counts, but not the appliances that might benefit them? Is that our understanding or not? Because if it is, what are we asking OD to do? Because that was my sense, but I could be completely off base.
That's my understanding, that delivered liquid biofuels are a clean heat measure. But,
yeah,
but delivered wood fuels aren't. Advanced wood heat is an installed clean heat measure that uses wood biofuels that have to have an emission factor associated with them, but that don't get credits directly from being delivered. The credits go to the, are earned during the, when the advanced clean heat measure, advanced wood heat measure is installed. That's my understanding.
Mine too.
Okay, so really, we whether you burn wet wood or dry wood, we won't know, because the credits are, but not on the fuel quality or the quality of the wood, but on the quality of the efficiency and the performance of the equipment.
As specified, for whatever test method they're using, and Emily Levin can talk more about that.
And we still have to, next week, we're going to talk about what constitutes advanced wood heat.
Right. And that has included a discussion of what type of fuel would be eligible to meet the emission standards. But we haven't finalized that.
But I'm sorry to belabor this, but if we're only giving credit to the equipment and not the biomass, whether it's whatever the wood that goes into the boiler or the stove, does it matter? Does it matter what? I'm not trying to say OD shouldn't do the work. I'm just saying we're short on time here. Is this something that we need them to do? Prioritize?
Well, that's part of the question, Matt, because there's concern that testing methods for cordwood appliances are not sufficiently rigorous or trustworthy.
Remember now. Okay.
As you remember, so that's still an issue.
Sorry.
And I just want to, get, from their sentence here, they are not going to create an installed measure for wood stoves replacing fossil fuels, and that's kind of the basis of my concern. They have to, if we, unless we agree we're not going to include wood stoves, and that's fine. But that's next week's discussion. But if we include wood stoves, then wood stoves have to be included as an installed measure, not as a delivered fuel measure. That is my main point on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. I think I've captured most of that, and Brian, welcome your help. Window heat pumps, any questions or comments on that? Seem to be saying, yes, this is worthy of inclusion.
Yeah, and I'll just note that the Equity Advisory Group is interested in window heat pumps. There's a feeling there that the might be, could be a low cost clean heat measure, particularly applicable for in low and moderate income housing.
Can I
Matt.
just provide a little color to that, Rick? That's right.
Oh, please
On the
do.
equity-
Please do.
on
If I got it wrong, yeah, please,
And these
please.
are fairly new products, and I don't know, I'm not an expert. I suspect they're not as efficient as the ones with the compressors outside. But the advantage of it being for low and moderate Vermonters who rent, just like they can take that window unit that provides cool air that they bought at Walmart, they could physically take this out and move it to their next rental unit. So it could be owned by, that was the discussion within the Equity Advisory Group about how it might provide a benefit to renters who don't make the decisions on what heating systems go in the home that they rent.
And that's
Right.
going to make the characterization very difficult because unlike I'll call it, permanently installed heat pumps, if you can take it with you, what happens to the future value of a credit? And a theme here, and it gets back to my initial point. This product is not sufficient to actually implement the clean heat standard. I mean, there's just so much that hasn't been done, and that's a big concern of mine.
I think there's also concern about how long these things last. The warranty on the product, I think, is like 2 years. So that's a concern compared to, fixed equipment, which is over 10.
I don't know of anyone that's actively installing them now, but they are sort of an interesting development that could be significant, or they may just fade away. Don't know. To be determined.
Okay, well, I think it sounds like it's worth noting at least some of the points that were just raised in response. So next we are on to comprehensive weatherization measures. Any questions, clarification, comments?
This one, meets my sort of general concern, and that is that if they describe it in such a way that is not consistent with the data that's collected, especially considering that these installations have been taking place in the thousands since January 1st, 2023, then the TRM becomes difficult to apply. And so on this one in particular, I look to the Weatherization Assistance Program and EVT to say, can you use this? Because if they can't use it, then that makes the TRM very less valuable. And so I ask that those folks that have been providing these services for 2 years, can they accomplish what OD says is the way you measure a credit?
Matt, I know the equity group has talked about sort of the weathers, they have somebody from the weatherization program on the equity advisory group. Have they addressed this at all?
I'm not sure how to answer. Yes, we've talked about it, but I'm not sure if addressing it means we've come to some conclusion or finality, which I would say no.
Okay.
Not to parse your words, but.
Brian?
Yeah, But I guess I wasn't, I think I understand that a custom measure means that there's not a predefined, you know, evaluation of this particular measure, but then, so then it would be installation by installation. And is that where your question comes from, Ken? Is like, is this practical for, you know, weatherization contractors or services to be able to actually do this on a, you know, like a project by project basis?
Yeah, that's translating my challenge. Yes. And this has happened thousands of times. And so though, do they have the data? Maybe they do. Maybe they're saying, no, we're fine with this. We can very specifically describe, because it starts off that, can be approximated by combining the air insulation, the insulation, the air sealing, blah, blah, blah. Well, but that is not how, Wayne, we know that is not how WAP does their estimates. They have a model, they use the model, and it's not based on incremental, this much additional insulation. It's largely based on the air infiltration change pre and after. So again, that my fundamental is those folks need to be comfortable that the TRM is going to be applicable for the work that they've already done, to say nothing of the work that will be continuing in the next few years. So that's the big question. Are they comfortable with it? If they're comfortable, I'm fine, because they're the ones that are going to do this.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. It's like, is this for the go forward, or is this for early action measures, which is a conversation we had some time ago and that we never resolved about, how do they need to be documented, and how are the early action measures going to be credited? So that's still in the bike rack.
Yeah, Rick?
Brian, I recall that in an earlier discussion about this, and I don't know if it was limited to early action credits, we did ask about, how weatherization is characterized, and, what kinds of calculations. I seem to recall some discussion about, square footage area of the building that's being weatherized is a, basis for the calculations. If that's the case, and this is what I'm hearing from Ken, if those data are collected and easily turned into, savings by before and after. They also talk about lower door tests for leakage, but that would seem to me to it might be that that's satisfactory, and that's certainly the question that we can put to OD and the WAP people.
Right. I agree, but I think it just brings back this bigger question of, how, there's a role for, these early action credits are supposed to be earning credits. But I remember Matt was the one that pointed out that, his clients are collecting a lot of paperwork and they don't know exactly what there's going to mean. I think the early action, in my view, the early action credits do serve a function in launching a functional market in credits in some way, and provides our on-ramp for compliance. That's important, but I don't know what the ramp needs to be. And these are just questions that we had discussed earlier in this process and left unresolved. But I understand that that's part of what's on our list of things to make a recommendation about. And so this just reminds me that related to this particular conversation, we have to have a bigger conversation about early action credits. How are they being, what's going to be deemed as documentable, particularly if we're using these TRMs, and, how many of them are how are they going to earn credits, and how many of them are going to be eligible for credits, or how many do we need in order to be able to provide that on-ramp for a functional credit market.
Noted. Thanks, Brian. And I think with that, let's keep moving through this. We've got many pages yet to go. Inside pools, commercial inside pools. Anybody have any comments, questions on that one? All right, liquid biofuel fired conversion of furnace or boiler.
Yeah, I just want to contrast this one. I agree with this one entirely. This is, I want to say I want to contrast this with that wood discussion we had earlier. We have no intent that if someone does a retrofit to their boiler and their tank, that they get credits for it. But they will get credits because the sale of biodiesel or renewable diesel takes place.
Okay, great. Any concerns about this response? Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, we had hoped to get credit for installing some of the newer, more efficient burners. I mean, it's still out there, but I understand the logic that Ken is going through, and we've got to make a decision about appliances, about which ones get credit, and which ones we're crediting the fuel. But obviously, some of the top of the line B100 burners that are going in, we want to put them in and encourage our customers to use them. That's a positive thing. But if the only way we're going to get credits is not only by selling them the burner for certain fuels and then selling them a fuel, then that's where the taglines, I won't protest too much.
Okay. All right, sounds like we're ready to move on then to commercial heat pump clothes dryers.
And well, this one's a tiny one. It does have a question. It does open the question that I think needs to be addressed generally, and that is electricity has a carbon intensity value. So any action that's in the thermal sector that reduces the electricity use for a thermal appliance, like in this case, a clothes dryer, is that eligible for a credit? This one they say no, but I think, again, there's this general question that something that is the replacement of an inefficient electric unit in the thermal sector with an efficient electric unit that reduces the use of electricity and thereby reduces the greenhouse gas emissions resulting from that thermal activity, is that a measure, a creditable measure?
And you would argue it should be. Is that right?
I just need, the PUC needs to decide. I could very easily, because I think it's such a tiny topic and it's a topic that's going to diminish over time as our electricity supply becomes less carbon intensive. I'd be perfectly fine to let this go. We've got big topics. This is not a big topic, so I would let it go just for ease of administration.
Okay.
But again, they need to decide explicitly.
Right. And I agree with you, Ken. That's my reaction there. But yes, as a general matter, if you're reducing emissions, they should be creditable. But I think you may be right about just how de minimis this may be. So we'll note it.
Any other comments? Okay. We are on to, if I can get this out of my way. As wood stoves referring to advanced, are wood stoves referring to advanced pellet stoves? Question.
We can deal with this next week.
Yes, we are. But any follow-up questions? So you're saying let's just defer that, any additional comments till to our discussion next week? Sounds right. Okay. Federal codes and standards. Oops, we got 2 pages of that. Yep, a little bit over here too. How are folks feeling about that response? Any comments, questions? Okay. On to ductless air source and air to water heat pump savings. Brian?
I'm sorry, Catherine, but I guess just one comment on that last one, and this is
Sure.
just for folks' information, that the Buildings Thermal Task Group of the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittees developing a whole series of pathway strategies and actions for consideration in the Climate Action Plan, and one of them is not specifically heat pump standards, but heating appliance efficiency standards, or not efficiency, heating applying emission standards that would apply to water heaters and heating appliances, boilers and furnaces. And that's going to be, there's a conversation going on regionally led by NESCOM with, that's drafting, going to come out with a model rule. There'll be a webinar at the end of the month that's going to have a model rule with a 0 GHG emission standard or requirement by 2029 for states to consider. So this isn't just a federal codes and standards issue. It may also be a state codes and standards issue, depending upon how the Climate Council decides to address this particular issue.
And is it covering only heat pumps or a broad range of appliances?
It's thermal equipment, so
Thermal equipment, okay.
water heaters and heating appliances. So it would be, all heat pumps, all water heaters, and then all furnaces and boilers.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Now let's move to ductless air source and air to water heat pumps savings. Emily.
This is Emily. I'm off camera today. I'm recovering from a cold, but I'm here. Yeah, I feel like I don't have any other additional comments other than the updates you've provided in the last couple tag meetings. So I think this is fine, knowing that it sounds like the department's going to have consistent numbers for this soon.
Right. So I'm assuming everybody on the tag has been sort of recalls the conversation we've had around this, that there was an inconsistency between heat pump hours of operation in the Efficiency Vermont Tier 3 and the proposed TRM OD, and that is being discussed for how it can be reconciled. Okay, then we're on to are the assumptions, again, I've got to move some things around to read this. Are the assumptions aligned with EVT TRM? And we have discussed that in past meetings as well. I don't know, Emily, if you had any follow-up questions or comments?
No, I think the way they described this seems accurate. And yeah, Ben's reviewed this and I think feels fine with the consistencies and has noted any inconsistencies. So nothing else to add.
Right. Is the information required for tracking progress aligned? That was another point that we have discussed and asked EVT to help clarify. And Ben also, I think, reviewed that for you and brought that back to the tag at a prior meeting.
Yep.
So we were good with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a heat pump option to replace rooftop fossil fuel thermal appliances? Any questions about that response? Okay, on to the next one. What will custom measures be used for? Everybody okay with that response? All right, then we're on to heat pump water heaters. No concerns about that response? The next one is on table 7, average heating efficiency, a baseline efficiency for commercial and industrial electric clothes drying. Seems too high and appears to assume a present heat pump adoption of 100%. Please explain. Not recalling who asked that question, but I'm hoping you've had a chance to review the response. All right.
I'll step in on that one really quickly. I believe I asked that. The concern relates to the baseline condition, assuming that if electricity is going to be included in either space heating or the actual appliance baseline condition, it shouldn't reflect a state of pre-existing measure adoption. You don't get a coefficient of performance of 3.66 unless you already have a heat pump. So if you're going to include some average space heating as a baseline condition, it shouldn't reflect a post-measure baseline condition. I hope I'm articulating that well enough for it to make sense.
And because I'm not in a place to interpret their response, are you satisfied with the response then, Matthew?
I am not.
You are not. Okay. So what would you like to be conveyed back to Opinion Dynamics or PUC?
I believe the department will address this in our comment and feedback to Opinion Dynamics in a filing.
Okay. Super, thanks. Okay, building thermal shell. Did I skip one? No. Building thermal shell measures and assumptions. How's everybody feeling about that response? Looks pretty elaborate. Goes on for a while.
Again, this is just related to the general question earlier. Their explanation is fine as long as it can be applied. And so we need to make sure it can be applied.
Being important part of that being that the data would be available to measure it and track it. Is that right, Ken?
Yes.
Okay. We also, I think, had a discussion with them in real time on the issue of costs when they were at one of our last meetings. Does anybody have any follow-up on that? The next 3 bullets are regarding costs. I think they've answered that in the past. Okay. Delivered fuels. The first one is on tracking and the need for additional data. Basically, they're inviting us here to provide additional data that might be needed. Anybody have some input that they can share with OD on this?
Trying to find the exact wording. Sorry, I have my computer. What exactly are they looking for in terms of additional data?
So the question was, a member suggested additional data is required for tracking, program tracking generally for liquid fuels, and the renewable attribute for fuels regulated under other programs and how they are reported and delivered when delivered. So the OD is basically saying, we welcome your recommendation on what additional data would be needed for tracking.
So is this in terms of verifying that the gallons are what they say they are and matching it to other programs that do something similar? Is that interpretation, Catherine?
I would
Matt,
defer,
I can
yeah.
comment on this one. That is essentially what this is asking for. The draft rule actually includes a comment on this for pipeline gas. So I think the department may also include a comment to the effect that any other fuels, in addition to pipeline gas, that have a program that attributes attributes to them should also be, those attributes should be included in the registration, basically the filing for verification of those credits, because both the clean heat attribute needs to be owned, as well as any other attribute. Otherwise, you're kind of splitting and double counting in another program potentially, or monetizing the other program's attribute elsewhere.
Yeah,
And
no
isn't this the RIN system? I mean,
Yes.
isn't every gallon, have attached to it a, federally developed documentation, and doesn't that exist?
The comment
Yes.
gets to not splitting that, basically saying if you're gonna use those gallons in this program, you're not allowed to use the attribute elsewhere.
Wait a minute. That, who's saying that? That doesn't make any sense. You're suggesting a federal program to incentivize biofuel production? If the upstream supplier uses that program, that the small fuel dealer in Vermont can't use that gallon and claim credit for it?
Well, where do the RINs go?
The fuel dealer would have to purchase the RIN.
No, that's not happening.
No?
This is an entirely different supply stream. We're talking about someone is putting 2,800 gallons on a pedal truck, and you're talking about RINs. Those are the largest refiners in America. This is a completely different system.
Okay, sorry, I must have misunderstood.
Dan?
So I think this is pretty standard in programs for at least renewable gas, and to maybe temper your concerns, Matt. What we're talking about here is if someone else was selling the fuel into a non-transportation market. So like the RINs example doesn't really apply to this, right? Because that would be going to the transportation market. I don't think there's any risk of overlap here, but all this is saying, and Matthew, please correct me, because I just want to confirm as well. To me, what this says is, we know that if we're using the fuel in Vermont, that we can't claim the fuel in another program. So there just has to be a record of that, right?
Right. And there are no other programs that incentivize biodiesel in Vermont for heat. So it is it. And
Exactly.
it should be done in 10 seconds. But it's also kind of crazy because we're double counting programs used for electric heat. We're counting it in the 2015 Tier 2-3 program, and we're also counting it in clean heat. So the idea that that a fuel dealer in Vermont is going to have to track the RINs gathered by Chevron, that's nuts to me. When we're specifically allowing double counting on the electric side. Sorry, that really.
No, I guess, but I guess my kind of bottom line is I don't know our rule well, and I mean I don't know how much detail we put into this whole tracking of any of the biofuels, but as it comes, I look to you, Matt, to make sure that whatever that system is makes sense. And right now I don't know it well enough, but we're going to need one. I'm hoping that we sell millions and millions and millions of gallons of this stuff, and we're going to need a system. And I'll look to you to say, is this a system that works?
Yeah. What we need
right now, I don't understand how it's going to work at all, but that's not for me to understand.
When the gallon comes in, we need to verify that it is in fact what it says it is on the bill of lading, which is a renewable fuel product. And we need to ensure that it's not sold twice, or when it is sold twice, because sometimes it is, sometimes sold 3 times, that's only counted once. That's the most important verification. Anything to deal with RINs and the major refiners and whether or not something can get a clean heat credit, defining whether or not it was incentivized way down the supply chain. That's impossible. That's an impossible task, and it's not fair.
Lloyd?
Yeah, I think this is not an issue for, at least for liquid biofuels, because the credits are going to go with the volumes, and the volumes are going to be sold in order to to fuel the appliance, right? Whereas other fuels, you may get a separation of the attribute versus the physical fuel itself under different programs. That may entail some tracking, but I don't think, at least for liquid biofuels, that's an issue, or it shouldn't be an issue, since the obligated parties are either the producer in Vermont or the importer in Vermont. So they're going to have the volume, they're going to generate the credit.
And
I don't seem to have the ability to raise my hand in Zoom today, but
okay,
to raise my hand, I don't know why that button isn't there today.
It's in reactions, Patrick.
sometimes
Yeah.
it's a sub of another one. So go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah.
And then we'll go over to Sam.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, generally agree with what Floyd just said here, but want to make a distinction also with RINs, since we're talking about that example. I don't think it is the best example to use here. RINs in other jurisdictions, projects can generate LCFS credits, for example, and RINs, because those are really, there are different claims associated with those. An LCFS credit is a claim for a given volume of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, like the Clean Heat Standard credit would be. A RIN is a claim associated with the production of a given volume of renewable fuels. Yes, there is overlap in them, because that given volume of renewable fuels with the RINs has greenhouse gas reductions associated with it, but there are not specific claims made for those. So I also think we should stay away from the RIN example.
Sam, and then Emily Grubert.
Thanks. Yeah, agree with everything that Patrick and Floyd just said. The RINs example gets complicated, and I don't want to, spend too much time on this, because I think it's relatively simple, and happy to provide more information outside of this call if that would be helpful. But there's basically two ways that you can track attributes for renewable gas that's pipeline injected. You can do it through an electronic registry, which we have under various state level programs. And we have a sort of fungible, broader registry called MRETS. Or option two is you can do it through essentially paper records, right? And any of these cases involve signing of affidavits, which would incur, a legal issue if there was fraud. So this is pretty well established in terms of additional data for tracking. I assume that means what would be included in the environmental attribute certificate. Again, happy to provide examples of that separately from this conversation, if that would be helpful for the PUC or for the rest of the tag. But I don't know that this is necessarily as complicated as we're making it out to be. I think including this pretty well accomplishes that we're not double counting, and that's basically it.
Okay. Any new points to be made? Emily Grubert and then Brian. Otherwise, it sounds like we've got a pretty good understanding of what the point is. Emily?
Yeah, I think the quick point that I would just make is that if we do expect that there's potentially ever going to be a situation where we would have more severability between the environmental attribute and the physical quantity, we might want to make sure that this is written to account for future changes. But otherwise, I think I don't have more to say.
Brian? Whoops.
Yes.
Brian, did we lose you? Here you are.
I'm here.
Oh, there.
Yeah, for additional discussion at another time, particularly on the liquid fuels side, the act, as I read it, like it's the credits are earned when the fuel is delivered. So, of course, Matt accurately characterizes the fuel market in Vermont as, fuel comes in, it, may get sold once, twice, three times before it's delivered. And at least the way I understand it, that's when the credit gets earned. And so you're not really, a credit's not really an environmental attribute. like a rec or a RIN. So I think the PUC probably needs to be more explicit in the rule about what tracking is required by whom in order to be able to sufficiently document that, some percentage of biofuel is coming, being delivered to customers to be able to earn the credits. And I don't think that system exists right now.
All right. All right, then let's move to the next one, which is the question of is land use change treated consistently? This is also a topic we're going to take up next week. We've had preliminary discussion about it, and we'll have a much more in-depth discussion about it at our meeting next week. So, okay to defer this? I'll take that as a yes. Then we're on to why is biodiesel intensities from corn feedstock lower than, I thought they answered this one too, lower than from waste-based feedstock. Floyd, I think this was your question, and I thought they answered this verbally for us. Did they?
This was my question.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry. There you go.
And they looked back into it and they addressed this, that
Okay.
they updated their calculation to reflect what my understanding was regarding the carbon intensity of waste-based fuels.
Great.
Did you want to say something, Sam? I mean, Floyd?
All right, let's move to please provide inputs and assumptions. They've done that. I think everybody has now access to all the worksheets for the GREET model. Our T&D losses applied. I believe. Anybody have any questions about the response here?
So this was a question that I raised. I wasn't suggesting that leakage be accounted for with transport of liquid biofuels. I mean, the exact opposite. I'm not aware of leakage literature out there. I guess what I was raising a question about was why was there a T&D factor shown for, I believe there was one for liquid biofuels, when I'm not aware of any literature that suggests that's an issue. So there was a T&D factor shown in the table, I believe, and I was just wondering where is that coming from as applied to liquid biofuels?
So, Floyd, I'm guessing that this didn't completely answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think they may have thought that I was suggesting there should be one, but I was suggesting the exact opposite, which is we shouldn't have one unless you could show that the literature shows there's actual, studies showing leakage from the transport of those fuels. At least that's my understanding what that table was supposed to mean. Maybe I misunderstood.
Brian, any insights on that?
I'm just reading their response, and it says to me the emissions are from basically the delivery trucks, and they're not accounting for leakage like spills. So I think that answers your question, Floyd, if I understand it.
But what emissions would those be? I guess my next question would be, are those like evaporative emissions?
They say tailpipe emissions. I think it's from the trucks, from the internal combustion engines in the trucks.
Okay, if that's the case, why isn't that already factored into the GREET model, which is supposed to be, well the wheels, including the tailpipe emissions? So from my point of view, that the T&D as applied to liquid biofuels didn't make sense because all of those things should have been accounted for in the GREET model. And if they were suggesting an additional factor, which that table looked like it was providing adders to that, I was questioning why is there an adder for that when there didn't seem to be any basis for it.
Well, we'll ask for that clarification, Floyd.
Yeah, that's what I needed, some clarification where that's coming from.
Okay. Now we're on to wood.
All for next week.
You want to defer all of these to next week? That would be great.
I would, unless someone wants to discuss them now, I think these all are for discussion next week.
Then we have electricity. System average emission rates. How are people feeling about that response? Rick, I know this is one of your interests.
Yeah, we've been through this, and the emissions rates or the carbon intensities values go down, assuming the transformation of the Vermont grid to all renewable by 2035, and I think that's appropriate. And it doesn't mean the numbers are zero, of course, and that's right. So I'm generally happy with this. It's fine, at least as I understand it. I think it's okay.
Anybody else? 4% T&D adder for line losses. Other studies estimate them to be higher. Okay, we got a lengthy answer here.
They talk about raising it to 6%.
Is the individual who asked that question feeling satisfied with this? Does the individual who asked this question remember that they asked it?
Yes.
Okay.
6 is better than 4. I think there's still some discussion to be had about how marginal emissions or load building emissions are actually scored, and that will also be included in the department comment.
Okay. Just capturing this in my notes. And we're at the end. Great. We're running a little bit behind, and I saw that Nora joined us while we were discussing the end of this. Nora, I know you have limited time. So before you got on, we were suggesting that maybe we would move to the public health for you and Jared to be able to walk us through that while we have you. Jared, you're on, aren't you? And would that be okay with you, Rick?
Well, that's fine. I was just going to say that Catherine and I will draft up a response to these responses and consult with you and try to get that out as soon as possible. And it would be, of course, added to after next week's meeting as well. So there might be 2 memos in that case. We'll see.
Okay. Jared, can I turn it over to you? And if you'd like, I can bring up the memo, or you can do that on your and share your own screen.
If you're able to do that, that would be lovely.
Okay.
Yeah, and let's just say that we're starting our discussion of public health impacts. This is the beginning of a discussion. There are a lot of questions here, and we want to give some thought to, how we want to weigh in and actually how we want to develop our thoughts on the subject. So I envision this as a multi-meeting discussion.
And let me just find your memo. I thought I had it open.
Ken?
Can I be reminded what the product that we're required to deliver is? Is this memo kind of, what is the product that we're required to deliver?
We have a task under, and I'm going to find it right now. Although it's mentioned I think, Jared, don't you have the task listed in the memo?
Yeah, if Catherine goes to page 1 of the memo, this is basically the summary of it here, Ken, which there's a little bit of background info in the top, but then if you scroll down to the Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group, public health considerations are mentioned in 2 different duties. Number 3 is this periodic assessment of health impacts, but all as one of a long list of kind of externalities of the clean heat standard. I think that I want to say somewhere that was referred to as like a biennial assessment, and there's maybe the language very literally is that that's to be done assessing and reporting kind of retrospectively, but we have a question here of, is there information relevant to number 3 that should be presented up front? Like if you know of a harm up front, why would you not state it versus reporting about it 2 years later? Number 8 is much more straightforward. Calculate the savings associated with public health benefits due to clean heat measures, which I have some commentary that that's a really challenging question. But those are the 2 duties.
Okay. So Jared, where would you like to start? I think folks that probably had a chance to read the background, you want to start with kind of the content you had for us on the actual impacts that sort of you've put together some sources of information on public health impacts. You want to start there and then see if I think one of your questions goes specifically to what else do we need to know in order to be responsive?
Yeah, I think just to touch quickly, you don't necessarily need to scroll back up, but to just touch quickly on some of the questions that we had as we were going through this is, again, to that duty about the biannual reporting. What does that look like? What does the tag need to do now? Is it just recommending a process for doing that? Or is there more information to provide up front? Question 4 in this list also kind of flags that we're talking about public health, and that was one of, 8 topics listed under that duty number 3. We're not necessarily taking on those other 7. So wanted to flag that that there's still other subject matter to theoretically address as one of those tag duties. Question 3 is sort of the so what, like, so what do we do with this information? I think it would be extremely challenging to follow through on the straightforward duty of quantifying the public health benefits or detriments. That's a major undertaking. And so what I've tried to do in this memo with some help from the NESCOM folks is to summarize some of the health considerations, not necessarily to get to quantification. So it seemed like a good starting point, but I think that's sort of an open topic for discussion is what information is really needed? Are there decisions that need to be made by the TAG, in terms of recommendations to the PUC? If it can't be a comprehensive and systematic, quantification of health benefits, what could we do that would be meaningful for supporting decision making in this process? So yeah, Catherine, if you can go down to
Yep.
So what I was attempting to do was probably to increase some confusion in how I've collapsed some of the topics here, and trying to find a path through doing some review of bringing information to you all that was not absolutely overwhelming. So I broke topics into essentially building envelope and weatherization strategies, electrical strategies, woody biomass, and the liquid gaseous biofuels as topics that I was trying to bring some health information in related to. A lot of the focus of the evidence that I was summarizing was on kind of end use at a person's home and health impacts associated with the different installed measures and delivered fuels for the end user. That to some extent ignores all of the potential upstream impacts, and that's I don't think they should necessarily be ignored. That was just a whole other large topic to try to take on for this first pass. So I just want to flag that most of the information that I'm bringing in here is is about the end user and not so much about the upstream, production, electricity generation, and whatnot. Although it's a little hard to disentangle in some places. So with all that said, I think I'll just do like a very high level summary and open it up for feedback. In terms of home weatherization, there is a pretty strong body of evidence out there that suggests that weatherization is really good for health, not just in terms of saving money, but in terms of improving both outdoor air quality by reducing combustion emissions, but also indoor conditions in terms of the thermal environment, the indoor air quality, moisture, pest intrusion, mental health of having, a weatherized home. There's a lot of connections there. So that's an area that I feel pretty confident saying weatherizing homes is generally good for health. There are a few things to think about in terms of, making sure that weatherized homes have sufficient ventilation. Tighter homes tend to, if you're creating air pollution inside the home from cooking, smoking, painting, whatever, that can be exacerbated potentially through weatherization. So making sure you have proper ventilation and treatment of indoor air is kind of one consideration. In terms of electric heating and electric appliances, again, lots of solid evidence out there that reducing combustion emissions is good for public health. In terms of resident health, certainly a lot of evidence on converting from gas stoves to electric cooktops, reducing exposure to some pollutants of concern inside the home. A lot of this is particularly concerning if a resident has asthma or some other kind of respiratory condition. And also wanting to flag that with something like a heat pump, the ability for it to provide air conditioning and some dehumidification as part of its air conditioning, we see that as a real benefit given the increasing, heat in Vermont and lack of air conditioning being a health concern for folks. So I'm not going to linger too much there. I feel like happy to take feedback, but I feel like those were fairly straightforward. On the wood heating side, I think we've already gotten into a fair amount of this. A lot of this commentary was just flagging that there are pretty substantial health impacts today from wood heating in Vermont. A lot of that is more associated with the older cordwood stoves. There's a wide range of types of equipment and types of fuels. So there's a lot of nuance here in terms of how much impact a particular household might have in terms of outdoor air pollution from wood heating, but generally any kind of wood heating generates more particulate matter and potentially other pollutants of concern than other types of liquid or gaseous heating fuels. I don't know if I need to say a whole lot more here because I think this has already been communicated in the wood heating conversation. I did just want to flag the one very great benefit of cordwood heating, or if there are other manuals or wood heating devices out there that they can keep working when the power goes out. And backup power, I think, is a consideration for most of the other measures and fuels that we're talking about. So for the biofuels section, this was by far the hardest to synthesize. I found this wasn't a very deep body of scientific evidence. And a lot of the published evidence is focused on the transportation sector and not necessarily on the home heating sector. I found a ton of nuance in the scientific evidence here in terms of different findings by what feedstock you're using, what the biofuel blend is, what you're combusting it in, if you're just considering end use versus upstream, more of the life cycle impacts. I think I found more kind of more literature focused on upstream impacts here than on end users. So there were some, Sam, I'll just roll through this and then take your question. There were some, I think, fairly consistent findings in terms of benefits related to reduced particulate emissions from biofuels. There were studies that flagged potential health concerns, particularly related to nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, some other air toxics. And I think a lot of those concerns were greater with higher biofuel blends, greater than 20%. But there, I'll just say there was a lot of mixed evidence out there. I didn't come out of that feeling very confident saying one way or the other whether, switching from fuel oil or natural gas, for example, to biofuels would be necessarily, positive or negative in terms of health impacts. The last little part is just about hydrogen fuels, even less information there. A lot of it depending on the impacts, a lot of the impact depends on the upstream factors, but there were some concerns, I think again related to nitrogen oxide emissions for end users. I think I'll stop there. The very, very last section, I was just flagging some other things that were coming to mind that I didn't necessarily integrate into the discussion above, was thinking about equity impacts, life cycle impacts, and what is being put in place potentially for backup power. I think backup power is kind of beyond the scope of the TAG's purview, but there are sort of health considerations with backup power systems as well. So I'll pause there and take Sam's question if you can.
Thanks, Jared, and thank you and Emily for putting this together. Admittedly, this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, so it's really interesting to see how you've laid all of this out, and it's really informative. So thanks. The one thing I wanted to raise here related to the renewable gas side of things is that I guess I'm a little concerned that maybe for the biofuels portion, we're lumping all different types of biofuels together into these assumptions, right? And so based on my understanding, and anyone please correct me if I'm wrong about this, based on my understanding, the difference in health impacts between fossil fuels versus biofuels is essentially based on the composition, the chemical composition of the fuel that you're replacing the baseline fuel with, right? And then if there's any change in end use technology, which, for the most part isn't relevant for drop-in fuels. And so to bring it back to the RNG side of things, I think the point about increased nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, formaldehyde, and overall toxicity. So RNG is essentially 98% similar to fossil natural gas, and the difference there is primarily based on RNG not having the higher chain hydrocarbon gases that occur when you extract gas geologically, right? And so I'm not sure. Well, first, the studies that I'm aware of actually say that RNG is better than fossil gas, even if just slightly from a human health perspective. And I think just like on a high level, given that RNG is 98% roughly, right, similar to fossil gas, I don't see how, and I'm open to being told I'm wrong about this, I don't see how there could be substantial health impacts really one way or another on that.
Thanks, Sam. And I think you're spot on that, there's some oversimplification here. And admittedly, understanding the world of biofuels is that's very new to me. I don't understand all the nuance there. And I think this was a big, it depends question. So information like that's really helpful. You know, if there are details like to better inform me about what types of fuels they're sourcing, you know, other details, what they'd be replacing, that I can integrate into this, that could help me narrow this summary and, you know, avoid some of the risks of the oversimplifying that I did.
Lloyd.
Yeah, thanks. And I agree with Sam's point, Jared. Thank you very much for putting this together. It's really helpful in terms of, you know, kind of gelling our thoughts on it. I also agree with Sam that this would be better served if you were able to parse out the different biofuels. I think there's distinctions between the biofuels that warrant a separate treatment rather than kind of this composite evaluation. I would say there is quite a bit of literature on the liquid biofuel side of things, and we're happy to help you, you know, go through that and identify those. It would be helpful for us, I think, as a tag, if you could provide what literature sources you looked at, so that we could see where the gaps are, and we can help you identify, you know, studies that could help fill in your gaps. There's quite a few, well, not quite a few, but there are studies by, especially by the national labs, that quantify the emission characteristics in heating equipment. So I agree with you. Transportation ICE engines are a whole different animal from heating appliances. So to the extent that we could rely on studies specific to heating appliances, I think that would be worthwhile. I would point out that Clean Fuels Alliance America did submit a comment letter back in the end of July to the PUC on the NV5 potential study draft. And in that comment letter, there was a summary of potential emission benefits that are associated with the use of biodiesel. One general trend you see in the literature is the reduction in particulates is directly proportional to the content of the biomass-based diesel. So I'm not sure where the one bullet that says health impacts typically more of a concern with biofuel blends greater than 20%. Particularly with particulate matter reductions, you know, you get sort of a linear response to the, in terms of PM reduction to the biodiesel content. And so I want to explore that a little bit more with you in terms of where you're getting that information. What was the other point? I do want to, you made a point, I think, in the other considerations that I think was important. I generally don't comment on electricity topics, primarily because that's not my wheelhouse, but I think it's an important point you bring up in terms of impacts related with upstream electricity generation. To the extent that, you know, heat pumps are going to require additional electricity generation, and to the extent that that generation comes from fossil fuel use, fossil fuel power generation, if those power plants are located in or near environmental justice communities, for example, you may get increased emissions of criteria pollutants such as NOx and CO, and those should be factored in if we're going to do a fair and objective evaluation across the board. So, just wanted to make that point that I think you bring up a good point, and I just wanted to illustrate that. I'll leave it at that. I think there is more literature out there that we could go through, and happy to help with that.
Thanks, Floyd. Yeah, I'm happy to share the list of resources that I've been referring to, and would certainly take pick you up on your offer to fill in any gaps, and certainly anybody on the tag is please do so. And I'm glad Nora raised her hand because you raised a couple of detailed questions that I think she's better positioned to respond to than
Okay, yes, thanks. Jared, thanks for sharing the memo. And I just want to point out, as a late comer to this process and a newbie to this process, that trying to summarize the health effects literature on a wide array of fuels is a very gargantuan task. So, and I appreciate all the feedback from Sam and from Floyd. It also helps me understand sort of the portfolio that everyone is talking about with respect to heating fuels. So the 20% bullet is definitely from the literature on transportation biodiesel, in the sense that there is a vast literature on transportation related research. In fact, I actually did my dissertation on biodiesel, so I'm pretty aware of what's going on in that sector. But I agree that in the residential heat sector, it's a different animal. We had not yet been able to really delve into that literature, so I would love to be copied on any studies that you have and that you're going to share with Jared. I think that's an appropriate discussion. I do think that it would be helpful to understand sort of the scope of the fuels, and then I can help Emily and Jared formulate more a beefier evaluation here. But I would say that even in the heat literature, especially for wood heat, but also for other heat, there's just been such a focus on particulate matter. And it's only more recently that there's been focus on measuring the other pollutants of concern, like very light chain hydrocarbons like formaldehyde and other aldehydes, which are carcinogens, the NOx that can obviously relate to ozone formation. So I think there's a lot of benefit for PM reduction, but we also have to keep in mind some of these other pollutants and methane. I mean, we found, in our recent wood study that even burning pellets produces a lot more methane than folks realize. So thanks for the discussion. I think we heard the feedback. I'm happy to answer any other technical questions. But other than that, that's what I got. Thank you.
Just real quick. Yeah, so thanks, Nora. Some of the studies that we talked about or that I mentioned earlier point to the substantial reductions in polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, NOx, SO2, and other sort of pollutants of concern. So that reinforces the notion that heating appliances are, they have different characteristics from transportation engines, and the literature that we've been able to identify show that when used in heating appliances, you can get substantial reductions beyond PM and into other criteria or toxic pollutants. So happy to share those sources with you.
Great, thanks, Floyd. We're probably at the end of our time for this segment. Unless there are other questions, I would suggest we move on. Let me just say that I think we've got some ideas for next steps here, refining this memo, refining our knowledge of the potential impacts. I think it might make sense, unless someone has another idea, that Jared, you and I put our heads together for how to proceed. There may be opportunity for, it may make sense to convene a small subgroup to roll up their sleeves and think about just how we want to go about educating ourselves and relating this to the tasks that the statute has for us. Clearly, it seems to me, one of the tasks we can't actually do without resources. And you pointed this out already, Jared, but let's think about it. If that's all right with others, we'll come back shortly with next steps. But the very first is, as you've all suggested, that we refine our literature search survey and further educate ourselves.
So that sounds like a great plan. And you did have some specific questions, Jerry, that you raised for the tags consideration. So I'm assuming that that will be part of the next steps, is how we're going to address some of those answers. All right. Well, we had one more topic, large topic before public comment. We only have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Rick, for how you would like to handle this, the draft rule and the companion memo. And maybe we can do it quickly.
Sure.
And let's see how that goes.
Sure. The essential question is, in my mind, the essential question with respect to the draft rule for the tag is there anything in the draft rule that relates to the tasks that the statute, that the legislature has given us? And if so, what are those elements and what do we want to say about them? As you've all taken a look at the draft rule, it's largely definitions and a series of processes that will occur outside the rule. Because as the companion memo points out, once the rule is adopted, it's fairly rigid. It takes time to change a rule. So all the technical work occurs through other processes, dockets, orders, so on and so forth. And that makes sense to me. And that's been the habit of the PUC for decades. So in my view, and this is only my view, I don't see anything in the rule that we necessarily need to comment on. I've read it 2 or 3 times. I have some questions about it, but I don't know that they they go directly to the tag's tasks. If others feel otherwise, I'm open to correction. The companion memo, of course, is, in my view, where items of most interest are, again, not as a matter of the tag's statutory responsibilities, but certainly as a matter of planning for the next few months of our work. So I'd love to hear from you as to what you think the draft rule means for us. And I'll start with you, Ken.
You know, I agree with your points. The draft rule itself, I don't think raised any issues that were contrary to the deliberations that we had, but the memo is. And I'm going to focus on one paragraph in particular. Our work, and this is now from the Public Utility Commission, but I believe that the work of the tag is in the term our work included. Our work over the past year and a half demonstrate that it does not make sense for Vermont as a lone small state to develop a clean heat credit market and the associated clean heat credit trading system. There is nothing that we did that would suggest that, and that topic was never raised to us. One of our assignments in the statute is to calculate the impact of the cost of clean heat credits and the cost savings associated with delivered clean heat credit measures. We never dealt with that. The consultant's work did not answer that question, and we never answered that question. So that was one of our very specific responsibilities that we did not cover. And for the PUC to say our work over the last year and a half demonstrate it does not make sense. Anyway, that paragraph is inappropriate at best. And one that I will challenge, but I'm not necessarily asking the TAG to draft a response, but I will challenge, because much of their work, much of the development of the clean heat standard does not fall under the TAG, but very little of it has actually taken place. If we go back to the initial schedule, all of those tasks that were going to be laid out that would have led to understanding the clean heat market have never taken place. And so when they say our work has led to this conclusion, well, that's work that we've never seen. So I'm going to end it there, because I don't think the TAG weighs in too much, but I'm just going to tell you I am, that's for sure.
I remember the line, of course. Would you remind me on what page it is?
18.
Okay. For me, the critical section is on pages 8 and 9. It's do I have that right? Let's see here. Section 5. Yes, it's section 5. This section, fairly clearly states that the PUC thinks an alternative approach to the clean heat standard ought to be pursued. As I said in earlier meetings, I think that the legislature can do what it wants to do, and if things change, then the nature of our work changes. I think under any clean heat program, and I can think of a variety of designs for one, I think a lot of what we're talking about will still be pertinent, clearly. But one could imagine certain issues going away under other program designs, such as life cycle analysis, for one. So I personally found the memo, I wasn't surprised, but I was a little, put off for a moment by section 5. But we have work still to do. The legislation hasn't been changed yet. There's going to be a debate in the legislature. I'll make no predictions as to how it's going to turn out. But that's sort of where I stand on this at this point, that we soldier on, but I expect to see some changes.
And indeed, it was page 8 and 9. I misread the little thing at the bottom. So it's the same section, section 5,
that's
page,
what
page 8 and 9. Yeah.
Right. I thought it was in that section. I just didn't remember.
Matt?
Any thoughts from others?
Matt had his hand up.
Yeah, I would comment, sort of tagging off what Rick said about the alternative proposal, because this conversation came up with the equity advisory group, which I'm on, but I don't speak for the entire equity advisory group. But I think that approach was, and I'm not maybe suggesting we do a similar approach there, was to suggest that an alternative approach would raise a different set of equity considerations, of which the equity advisory group has not examined. And I think the same might be true for the technical advisory group. I think we know what they're referring to. We know what the Act 62 study was, but we haven't had the time, nor the directive, nor the inclination to examine that from a technical perspective. The only other piece that I would say is, and I'm not suggesting we say this, but I'm going to throw it out, which is we've been asked to do, and the consultants have been asked to do, and the PUC has been asked to do an incredible amount of work in a very short amount of time. And would this process be different if there was an extension? Would there be better results if there was an extension? I don't know. That obviously is a legislative decision, but it's certainly something the technical advisory group could suggest or recommend or point out if it was the will of the group.
Fair point, Matt. And let's give it some thought. I think that I don't think we have to say anything about that quite yet. It seems to me that we'll have the opportunity, if we're asked, to speak to the legislative committees on this. And at that point, perhaps we can put our heads together and Well, we can, obviously, individuals can speak for themselves in their organizations, but if the tag itself wants to say something before the legislature, if it's asked, we'll need to talk about that. But yeah, that's a fair question, is, what alternatives will the legislature look at? And if an extended period of time to develop the CHS is thought to be one of them, yeah, we might have something to say about it.
Anybody else have any other comments you want to make about the draft rule? Its relevance to our deliverables, its relevance overall.
And if something occurs to you later, and yeah, we can come back to this question, we've got time on that, but at this point, yeah, this seems fairly, I guess, straightforward.
Brian, last word?
Not the last word. I'm going to, as we're transitioning to public comment, I just want to note that I have a very hard stop at 12:30. So
Got it.
wherever
Thanks.
we are, I'm going to need to leave. But I'm interested in the public comment, and if I can't stay on for all of it, I will be reviewing the recording.
All right, well, let's go there. So I need to see my participant list. Public comment. Any members of the public want to comment on the discussion we've had so far? First hand up I see is Tristan Brown.
Thank you. Really appreciate the work the Department of Health put into developing that document. I've done no small number of literature reviews in my time, and it's a big effort. So really appreciate what you've done. I would encourage you to include references, show us the citations. And the main reason I say that is there's been a fair bit of recent work, government bodies in places like New York, California, that have, I'll just say, maybe reached different conclusions with regard to individual biofuels compared to what we saw in that document. I'll be providing comments that make reference to those, but it would just be very helpful, allow us to identify any gaps in the literature, help fill them in, result in the most comprehensive document possible. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and appreciate your offer to help provide additional references. So the phone number ending in 5603, could you identify yourself and your organization or affiliation?
Hello, this is Thomas Weiss, a pro se member, party, I mean. And my comment has to do with the health aspect as well. I appreciate what was presented, but for my own personal experience, I know that my hot water heat pump has leaked refrigerant over the years, a significant quantity, and the leak hasn't been stopped. So I would appreciate if the health effects of heat pump leakage for the refrigerant, particularly inside the house or the residence or the building, if it's not a residence, what the health aspects of that might be. That's
Thanks.
my comment.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Laura Height.
Hi, Laura Height, Partnership for Policy Integrity. I agree. Thank you very much, Jared and Nora, for this really valuable information you've shared. Just a comment on the proposed rule and the tags rule. The CHS rule does not make any provisions related to public health. There's no provisions for limiting clean heat eligibility based on public health considerations or any other adverse consequences. And, you know, we've gone through quite a lot of discussion in particular about potential health threats from various wood heating appliances. I think there needs to be a process put into the rules for screening technologies or potentially fuels that would qualify. And at a very minimum, TAG is really very close to coming up with a recommendation for a definition of advanced wood heating. This is the opportunity now before the rule is finalized to put in a definition of advanced wood heating, to add any other clean heat measures that the TAG thinks would be appropriate to include in the first cut. And I encourage you to use that. You don't have the power, but your recommendation to advise the commission to make such changes. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you very much. That's an interesting point. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Or you still have your hand up, I assume that's just, yeah, there you go. Well, if not, there are no other comments. I'll close by saying we've put together a draft agenda for next week's meetings. Is there anything we're deferring some of our conversation today until then? Is there anything in particular that you want to see on next week's agenda that we might not have thought about? Ken?
Yeah, you said we have a bit of time in terms of the draft rule. I believe the comments on the draft rule are due November 1st. And I'm not maybe next meeting I can just have a very brief proposal that I don't expect us to unanimously agree to, but it's related to my term that when they talk about our work suggesting this, it had nothing to do with the technical advisory group, but we can discuss that. But other than that, we may not want to submit any comments. But if we do, it'd be the limited anyway. But it is November 1st, so we'll have to deal with that next week.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, thank you. And we'll quite frankly, we may want to consider the public comments we've just heard as justifying a quick response. So or a response next week. So we'll add some time to the agenda for that, and I'll give some thought to what those additional comments might be, as well as, and you too, Ken, that'd be great. Anything else? Well, if not, thank you very much. We're going to close 2 minutes early. Really appreciate all the time and hard work, Jared, everyone. Enjoy the weekend. Have fun. We'll see you next week. Same time, well, an hour earlier next week. Be safe.
All right. Thanks all.